Hello, SPCM 200. This is Professor Nice. I'm just coming to you all with the parts of a speech presentation. Most of this information was pulled from Chapter 5 and 7 of your textbooks. We also pretty much cover it during workshop weeks, but this is a more in-depth view of everything that hopefully will be helpful to you all, just different things that you should include in your speech, different things to take into consideration. But so starting off, we're going to be kind of going through this using an example. As I record this, we're working on the informative speeches, so that's kind of what this outline is based off of. The information that I'll be presenting to you can be applicable to any of the speeches coming up, but just for the sake of convenience, we'll go with the first one that you all have done. This is the informative speech. This is an example that is on the outline that is available to all of you. But so this hypothetical example is dark chocolate. Their specific purpose statement: to inform my audience about the history and health benefits of dark chocolate. Thesis: the health benefits of dark chocolate began as beliefs in ancient history, are currently supported by health research and studies, and could be a significant part of the future of health, dark chocolate, and the chocolate industry. Pattern of organization: chronological. So this also roughly looks like what you would do for a topic proposal for me. As we go through, this is just going to be the basic outline. It's not going to actually be what this hypothetical dark chocolate speech is. But so going forward, we're going to start with introductions. So an introduction is a relatively short opening to a speech in which the speaker prepares the audience to listen to and be engaged with the speech. Introductions are very important because they're essentially your first impression with your audience. You want to put a good foot forward and you don't want to start stumbling from the get-go. It's also very important for audiences to kind of know what they're getting into, kind of know what you're going to be talking about coming up. So introductions, you want to start off well. You don't want to just kind of come in, oh, hi, like I'm gonna speak about it. Like, you want to show that you are interested, so your audience is interested. But so speaking of that, what is an intention getter? An intention getter is a statement at the beginning of a speech to end audience distraction and draw their focus. So specifically when they say to end audience distraction, you can picture that that would kind of be something that would happen per se at a wedding where there's kind of chitter chatter, like imagine someone tapping on a glass to just kind of get people's attention. In our small space, especially since usually the class size are limited down to 8 people, you won't have to deal with that. Also, especially because I'm going to have to time you, so there won't be any noise you need to speak over. But still, regardless of that, capturing audience attention is still something that's very important. The book kind of says that it should be something surprising or shocking. You can do that verbally, I would recommend. I think that that can be a very effective way of capturing audience attention. Imagine someone standing up and being like, so when I was 3 years old, I almost died. That is a very shocking statement that immediately kind of captures everyone's attention. They want to know what you're talking about. They're interested, they're invested. Whereas if you started off with something a little weaker, like, hi, I had to choose a topic, so I just kind of thought I would do this. That's not engaging. That's not specific to your speech alone. Everyone can say that. So it's not really worthwhile. If you've written, I'm sure you've all written essays before, but this essentially is the verbal equivalent of a hook in an essay, just something that captures your audience. For the dark chocolate example, their attention getter that they wrote on their outline was, by a show of hands, how many of you like chocolate? Keep your hands raised if you have indulged in the sweet at some point during the last week. That's very effective, kind of starting off with audience engagement, because that requires them to all be actively participating, but you don't necessarily have to do that, just something to consider. What is a relevant statement? A relevant statement tells the audience that the topic under discussion will have some consequences for their lives. You might have chosen something a little niche per se, maybe something that is very important to you that might not be as important to other people. Like, let's say you were talking about the history of anime and someone in class is like, I could not care less. You kind of, with your relevancy statement, want to say something that makes it clear that it would also be applicable to their lives. You don't want to exaggerate and say anything that is not necessarily true. You don't want to try to like bait and switch them into thinking this will be applicable for their lives, only for it inevitably not to be. And it's really important to show what you're talking about has meaning. In the dark chocolate example, their relevancy statement, and this also is tied into the idea of after the attention getter introducing your topic. But as I've just shown you, the majority of people enjoy chocolate. According to the National Confectioners Association, the majority of Americans like chocolate, with almost half of the population consuming this sweet confection every day. Then B, my guess is that while many of you enjoy chocolate, dark chocolate might be an unfamiliar. So that, of course, also this is their outline, so it's kind of very skeletal and it will make sense to them, maybe not as much as to you. But so that's something you kind of want to do. This person within this example clearly showed that this is something that's pretty prevalent. Even if you're in the class and you didn't raise your hand, you can visually see a lot of other people did. And they kind of clearly prepared in case no one in the class raised their hand and they couldn't say that, like, as I've just shown you, the majority of you guys enjoy it. They still are coming in strong with this National Confectioners Association example. And then kind of going hand in hand, what is a credibility statement? A credibility statement is a way for the speaker to show the audience that they know about the topic they will speak on through research and experience. So it's kind of showing that you are coming from a position of knowledge. That knowledge might come from personal experience if you were talking about something like breaking your leg, like what happens when you break your leg, and you start off with like, when I was 7, I broke my leg. Immediately the audience understands you do have credibility talking about this because you have experienced it yourself. You don't necessarily have to have that connection, especially in like an informative speech or maybe a public deliberation where you don't have any personal connection with this. You can still say something like, I've always been fascinated or I've always been intrigued. And so after doing a lot of research, I think it's very interesting, you know, whatever you think. But so in this example, establish credibility, I'm a dark chocoholic. This person is showing I care a lot about this. Subset A, I was introduced to real dark chocolate while living overseas in Europe. B, since then I have been hooked on this rich yet bittersweet treat. C, over the past few years, dark chocolate has become an increasingly popular subject, spawning extensive health research that suggests dark chocolate is beneficial to one's health. D, as a consumer, I become interested in all that dark chocolate has to offer, and I look towards the research literature for answers about its health benefits. So we know that this person's topic isn't going to be, I love it, like it is so important to me, but they're doing a good job of showing with this credibility statement, this matters to me, it is important, and then slowly it progresses into the bigger picture. What is a thesis statement? All of you should be pretty familiar with this. If you've ever written an essay, it's basically the same, only the verbal equivalent. A thesis statement is a single declarative statement in which the speaker makes the central overarching arguments of their entire speech. It should come before the relevancy statement and credibility statements. I accidentally didn't delete that, more on that later. It usually presents itself verbally in a speech as a, in this speech I will blank. Depending on what type of speech, the adjective will be different. I will inform, I will persuade, I will introduce. It differs from speech to speech, and this one in particular coming up at the time of my recording, it would be the I will inform audiences about XYZ topic. Sometimes people like to be a little more flowery with their language. They don't necessarily like to be as direct with it. But especially at this very new stage when you're trying to just show you know how to give a speech, in this speech I will is a great indicator of this is my thesis statement. So your audience can also audibly pick up on that and be like, okay, so this is the purpose of the speech. And then lastly, introductory wise, is what is a preview? This oftentimes can be overlooked, but it actually is very important. Many of you might have noticed, didn't include this within your quick start speeches. This is you giving out a roadmap of what your upcoming speech will look like. Essentially, like, imagine your introduction of your speech as the like teaser trailer preview for the full-length movie, which is the body of your speech. And then conclusion would be something like the critic reviews afterwards or something, just like the brief synopsis on the back of the DVD. But so what is a preview? A preview tells the audience what the speaker will be talking about in the next few minutes to give them a sense of what is to come, to get the audience excited about what follows. They might have heard your introductory thing and been pretty pumped, and then let's say you ignored the preview and you just go into your next topics. They maybe don't care about topic A, they start fading away, whereas with your preview you can set up, I will be talking about A, B, C, D. They hear D, they're super interested, and you kind of can retain their attention that way. But in the example, the thesis and preview, which the thesis was from the slide before, today I will share with you a brief history of dark chocolate and health, what current research findings suggest about its health benefits, and what the future looks like for this decadent sweet. Signpost, first let's take a step back and unwrap the rich history of dark chocolate. And I think we'll be talking about signpost coming up in a few slides, but just to take into consideration. But so you can see the preview very straightforwardly in this. History of dark chocolate and health, what current research findings suggest about its health benefits, and what the future looks like for this decadent sweet. So we have 3 right there that we can visually see, or if we were listening to this, audibly tell, okay, these are the main points of this. And so on to the body of the speech. This is going to be the real meat of your speech. It will comprise about like 80% of it, so it's very important. But the body of a speech is the bulk of a speech in which the speaker makes arguments, presents evidence, and develops claims to move the audience. So what are main points? This might seem a little redundant to some of you. You're like, okay, obviously I know what this is. But there are some intricacies that go into what should be within like your body that you'll want to listen to later. But in case you didn't know, main points are claims that undergird and support our thesis statement. Most main points appear as a single sentence in which the speaker presents a single line of argument, foundational claims. And most speeches have around 2 to 4 main points. The ones in this class definitely will. Usually they average around 4 to at max 10, I think, minutes, including some moderation. But so you'll want to kind of focus on 2 to 4 main things. If you think that you have 2 that you can speak a lot on, you can do that. 4 that are kind of brief and you feel like they need the overview on every one. Really just kind of feel what you think would be most appropriate for the topic that you've chosen. So I didn't list all the main points within the outline just because that would have taken up so much space. But so their first main point was, according to the Smithsonian, historians estimate that chocolate has been around for at least 2,000 years. So we can see immediately that is their point. It is in a single sentence, it is straightforward, and they have a citation, which is amazing. What are subpoints? Subpoints are the smaller assertions we make about the world in support of our main points. And then they're like the backup points, if you will. Here, going back, we can see in an outline that that was the Roman numeral 1 for according to. And then going here, it kind of delineates into the smaller subsection. So here we have a big A, and you can have subpoints to your subpoints. That's absolutely fine and very, very common. And that's what the numeric numbers are. But so their first subpoint off of this main point, according to the Smithsonian historians, estimate that chocolate has been around 2,000 years. In order to understand the history of dark chocolate, it is important to understand a few things about chocolate itself. These are the things. The National Confectioners Association states that chocolate is made from beans harvested from the cocoa tree. The beans are enclosed in what is known as a cocoa pod. Once removed from the pod, the cocoa beans can be used. Dark chocolate is cocoa that contains little or no sugar and no milk and is bitter and has a strong flavor, blah, blah, blah. Within this, something to take into consideration is we have main point 1. And then, as I said before, I didn't include all of them because that would just start to get a little overwhelming, I felt. And because you have access to that document already, if you go to the place where you would submit your outline, it is there as like a preview. But so for subpoints, there's A, B, C, D, however many subpoints you want to your main point. And so in this point A, you can tell that this person wanted to focus initially on what even is like the cocoa bean or whatever. Like, where does this come from? An origin story, if you will. So here, kind of moving on, those are the two main parts of a body, and then all of these are more the technical aspects that go into it. But so here we have order. Order is something very important to take into consideration, so you're not just kind of bombarding your audience with information. Just like, for example, using this, I had to start off with telling you what main points were so you foundationally knew what I was talking about in reference to point. So then I wasn't just coming in talking about order when you don't have that to go off of to know what I'm even talking about. But so order, something to take into consideration are the ordering principles, which are general rules about how your speeches should be shaped based on human psychology and experience. So there are different types, which you'll see clearly here, but the primary principle states that whichever point or idea in your speech is the strongest or most important should go first. And that is based off of research that states people are more attentive within the beginning of speeches. You have their attention already. They're kind of here, ready to learn, and they are under the presumption that attention will kind of peter off as you go on. So it's important to get the most important information out first. That is what the primary principle believes in. But the recency principle, so you can choose kind of like either or, whichever one you think fits best, whichever one you actually believe in. The recency principle states that whichever point, wow, I clearly didn't press the space bar, point or idea in your speech is most important should go last. Okay, and I just like forgot words. I'm so sorry about that, but hopefully you're listening. But recency principle states whichever point or idea in your speech is the strongest or most important should go last. And that's based off of researchers who think that actually, in contradiction, you listen to the introduction and then you kind of piece out, and then when you can they think that you can gain audience attention at the end. Usually I see people utilizing the primary principle. I imagine the recency principle would be something maybe in a longer speech to kind of really have a resurgence there at the end of okay, and this is important, and then people are interested and they'll be listening out to your conclusion. These are just two things to take into consideration. I believe they are in chapter 7 of your book near the end, I think. If not, chapter 5. But so the ordering patterns are prefabricated methods of ordering points that are applied to an entirety of a speech. And this is something, in my opinion, a little more important than the other one, because I don't think any of you are going to put your strongest point in the middle. That would be a strange power move. But the ordering patterns are very crucial to kind of formulating the logic behind your argument a bit. But so ordering patterns, prefabricated methods of ordering points that are applied to an entirety of a speech. So the chronological pattern would be used if you were kind of talking about something in a step-by-step process. For your information speech in particular, if you were doing something like how to build a chair, idealistically, I don't actually know how to build a chair, but I imagine step 1 would be get wood, Step 2, lay everything out. Step 3, construct it. Let's just say that, for example. You wouldn't want to organize it with, well, you pound the hammer. Oh, also you need to get the wood, and you need to think about what chair you want, because you're going out of a chronological order. You wouldn't build a chair starting from the last step going forward. So a chronological pattern is something that the most important way you should order this would be in the order someone would do it. So usually they're kind of apply to DIY type things, but you might find that it fits with other topics as well. But spatial patterns would be something kind of based on location, juxtaposition, or hierarchies. So an example with this for, like, let's say location, if you were talking about places that were colonized by England or something, you could do the United States, you could do Africa, you could do the other countries that the UK has had a hand in, like, intruding upon, and that would be important to do spatially, because you wouldn't want to modge podge all of these places and all of these different incidents of injustice together, because they all have their own different histories. So if you want to organize, like, topic 1, America, topic 2, this, topic 3, that, that would be why you would use a spatial pattern. Juxtaposition, hierarchy. Hierarchy in particular would be if you were talking about an office building per se, and you wanted to talk about the lower status of people, the middle status of people, the higher status of people, and it was kind of a hierarchy in that way. Like if you were talking about moving up in a job, like you could do, well, first you would be an intern, interns do this, this is the job positions, later down the line you could move up and you could be a full-time employee, and then later down the line you could become management. That is kind of what a spatial pattern is. It is chunked in that way. Circular patterns are something that you start off at the beginning. You're kind of telling a narrative, and then you'll end up full circling back to something. So per se, if you were doing advocacy work and you started off with, I think it's really important that we all participate in Say Yes Women, this organization. I think it's very important. Then your next point is, this is how it was founded, this is what they do, and this is why I think it is important that you volunteer, and boom, you're back at the beginning. So kind of a full circle in that way. And then narrative probably is the one that would be most comfortable to us all. It is a story. And I'm sorry if you hear jangling, that is my cat interrupting my lecture. But a narrative is kind of like if you were telling the life story of Helen Keller. You start from when she was young, when she was diagnosed, the advocacy work she did later in life, blah, blah, blah. Just kind of doing it in that way to where you get the lifespan of someone. It could also be if you were recounting a story or a movie. You wouldn't really necessarily be doing that within this class, but you might, for some reason, be giving a speech of that sort. You would want to start at the beginning of the movie and not just, like, spoil it for everyone. That would be like if I started with conclusion. That would make no sense. So, what to include within the body of your speech. So these are very important things. Some of them will kind of come as duh, obviously, but some of them you might have not considered within this framework. But so evidence, of course, you want to back up everything you say with credible sources, with evidence. There will be another PowerPoint much like this posted later, most likely tomorrow, about specifically how do I conduct research, how do I get evidence, how do I do a works cited page, things like that. But so evidence is credible information about the world that can be used to support a claim. You always want to have evidence, because or else you essentially could make absolutely anything up and try to push something with no backing, and you would lose all credibility, because are we supposed to trust you talking about, like, the science behind toasters? That you need to have facts to show that you've actually looked this up. Forms of proof which there are two different types. There's inartistic forms and there are artistic forms. Inartistic forms of proofs are types of evidence that exist in the world that the speaker can point to support their claims. These all are probably things that you are familiar with. There are definitions, which is extraordinarily important if you're using any sort of jargon that you don't think someone might be familiar with. Having definitions would be important for that. Testimonies, statistics are always really good, those cold, hard facts, like you can't question numbers. Laws, contracts, or oaths. Precedent, just in case you don't know that word, precedent is something that has come before. So I think we should do this because as history has proven, it works. Narratives, which is just like someone else's personal account of something that you're utilizing to prove your point. But so kind of the whole inartistic forms of proof, like all of them exist. They're something that you can pull from somewhere to benefit your point. Whereas artistic forms of proof, this is something that's kind of dated back in Aristotle's day. He came up with this idea of artistic forms of proof. You might have heard this in an English class, you might have not, so we'll kind of go through these. But they are evidence that speakers can create in the course of giving a speech to support their claims. So whereas inartistic proofs come externally from the speaker, artistic forms come internally. They are something that you can either create or not create. And as we go through these, I'm not saying that you have to include every single one, just like the inartistic forms of proof. You don't have to include every single type because it simply might not fit your speech. It's all about kind of gauging what your speech requires, what you think would be most beneficial. But so the artistic forms of proof, logos, ethos, pathos, some people say pathos. I was not a good scholar and I didn't look that up before doing this presentation. But logos, ethos, pathos. Logos is presenting information in a clear and logical manner. So logos would be coming to your speech with a ton of evidence, showing that you have researched this, showing that you are educated on the topic. And by providing logos, it establishes credibility with your audience, and they learn to trust you. That is something, an environment that you are setting based on your behavior. Ethos is the credibility of a speaker. It's much kind of, they go hand in hand a bit. Logos would be like in an essay, really providing strong, sound things, whereas ethos would be establishing credibility of like, well, I experienced this firsthand. I know this from having dealt with the source material, things like that. So logos is really knowing the facts. Ethos, you're showing how you're connected to the facts. Pathos or pathos is the use of emotional appeal by the speakers. So that would be very important if you're trying to have emotional impact within your audience. If you were talking about, essentially, if you can imagine those like in the arms of an angel, like animal rescue commercials, the one that play the Sarah McLachlan song, they are like punching you in the face with pathos. They want you to feel sad. They're like, look at all of these like poor abused dogs, look at all of them not living good, and then they like throw at you, but you could donate $5 and you could save them. And then like you kind of feel sad, like you want to do it because they have appealed to pathos. You could do that by saying something sad, and it doesn't necessarily have to be sad, it can be happy too. You can make your audience feel enlightened, you can make your audience feel indignant and angered. If you were doing something on the Black Lives Matter movement and you showed all these examples of injustice and violence, that could be a good use of pathos because your audience will likely see these images and realize, oh my God, what you're saying is absolutely true. I can see this, and it can start to get them angry and riled up. But so those are just kind of examples of how that would be utilized within a speech. Secondary dimensions of argument. These are just things to consider. They're kind of ways of talking within your speech, different things to use that will help you, that will help establish your credibility and help really cement your argument. But backing evidence that shows the speaker's reasoning is credible, authoritative, and makes sense. So sometimes that can be like cementing your ideas and what you're saying within the world. I think back earlier within the introduction when we were talking about the dark chocolate thing, they were pulling out like, well, the Smithsonian says this, or, oh, we have examples of this here, like it's actually showing this is true, and other people say it as well. It's not just me. A qualifier is a statement of the degree to which the speaker is certain that a claim is true or valid. This is just kind of being honest and open. This could be good with the public deliberation speeches where maybe you don't have a strong opinion on the topic. It might come up in a narrative example, if you choose to use that, a narrative form of evidence where, let's say, someone was interviewed by just someone, but the speech maybe, or the interview wasn't cited very well. Maybe there's some issue on if the journalist edited it at all. This would be something to where you want to be upfront and honest of, the source material was a little sketchy, but you probably wouldn't say sketchy, because if it was that bad, you wouldn't be presenting on it. But it's something along those lines where you're not quite certain how much this is true, but it's worthwhile for your audience to know. So it's just kind of saying that. And that makes you look strong with your audience, because let's say it's one where you have like kind of a talk back afterwards, and someone raises their hand and they're like, did you know that that was not a good source? You would have already addressed that. And then kind of along the same lines, the rebuttal, it also is sometimes talked about as a counter argument, but rebuttal is a statement that acknowledges the circumstances under which the speaker's argument would no longer be valid. So if you were just talking about something and it would easily be rendered false by like this, that, or the other thing. I'm not thinking of like the best example, but yeah, my brainstorming's coming up false. But if you were researching something and you found a ton of evidence kind of negating what you were saying, it would be something worthwhile to bring up. If you do not address it, then it looks like you don't have enough confidence in your argument to address that someone might disagree with you. It looks like you're kind of trying to avoid this. But so, transitions are important. They help you flow from main point to main point. They can be kind of hard for some people, but just imagine going from, we're talking about this, to boom, we're talking about this now, like just without any sort of like acknowledgement. For the chocolate example, now that we've heard about the ancient history behind dark chocolate and how its perceived health benefits, let's get a taste of what current research suggests about this sweet. So this is very blatant. This is saying we were just talking about this, now we're moving on to this. That is absolutely fine. If you wanted to do something a little more, I don't know if nuanced is the right word, but like it could be something like, in ancient history, we've seen that there were a lot of health benefits. As the decades have progressed, we have seen that that is true. But in present day, I would be interested about the research, which is essentially what they just did. But it's just that here is topic A, how it relates to topic B. Verbal citations, not my most eloquent slide, I must admit, but you need to include them. There'll be more on that PowerPoint that I talked about previously that I will be uploading about citations and research, but you need to have all this evidence. We've been talking for like 30 minutes about the importance of evidence, and you didn't just get that from nowhere. And kind of going along with establishing your credibility, establishing that logos, that ethos, you need to say where it came from. So if you provide a piece of evidence, whether it be just a statistic you found, if it's a direct quote, just like in a paper, you can get, this is plagiarism. If you were to speak and to not address where it came from, it would be plagiarism. If you just got up and you were like, I have a dream, that's a really good speech, isn't it? That's Martin Luther King Jr. We all know it. You didn't say it, so docked points. But they can come in many different forms. It could be In her book, I Like to Watch by Abby Norman, she discusses different television genre tropes. Like, that's just vague. That is what it's about. In his iconic speech, I Have a Dream, Martin Luther King said, I have a dream, just kind of making sure that you say where it came from. It's not as in-depth verbally. You will turn in a works cited page where it will have kind of those nitty-gritty details. But within the actual verbal citations, you won't need to do anything like, on page 22, paragraph 4, line B. You don't need to be that specific. The most important thing is giving credit to the author and letting us know where we can find it. And also letting us know what type of media it is. Are you citing a tweet? Are you citing someone's blog? Are you citing a website? Because that also kind of tells us the credibility of this. Also, if you're talking about someone in particular, including their credentials will help establish how we should be taking this information. Like Dr. So-and-so has a master's from this place, like different things like that to include to kind of establish your validity of including this. Things to avoid. These kind of could appear as obvious, but you would be surprised at how often they show up in speeches. I'm sure as I say these, some of you might think, oh, my friend said that to me, or like, oh, yeah, I've definitely seen that in a speech from someone prolific in power right now. You don't want to have unclear arguments if you're just kind of like trailing off and people are like, why did they bring this up? Why does this have any purpose? If during the chocolate speech, you're like, yeah, and I just, like, sometimes people use chocolate for, like, face masks. Anyway, it's like maybe you were trying to say that that's one of the health benefits, but you're not telling us. We don't understand. It's unclear. Unsupported arguments, that goes hand in hand with those citations, those verbal citations. We need to know what you're talking about. Unethical arguments, don't do slander, don't do like lowbrow things. Make sure you're using credible sources. And then arguments made on the wrong terms of, if you were talking about chocolate and then you're starting to relate it to something else, like, well, apples are healthy too. Did we need to bring that in? That wasn't really like important, but okay, whatever. And then underneath this line break, these are some logical fallacies. I forgot to have like a bullet point that said that in particular, but these are different logical fallacies that come up while giving a speech that will damage how you look, and it will misinform your audience. But the first one is ad hominem. Ad hominem is so prevalent, it is depressing. But ad hominem would essentially be like giving a speech like, and this is why I don't think you should elect so-and-so. Because, I mean, have you seen their hair? Disgusting. You are attacking their person. You are attacking them. It could be, she's so dumb, she hasn't gone to elementary school. Like, haha. Like, you're attacking their intelligence, you're attacking their physical appearance. Anything where you're not actually addressing the point someone's making, and it makes you look weak because it's essentially resorting to schoolyard taunts. Like, it doesn't take any sort of nuance to say these things. It just seems like someone grasping at straws. You can especially see these in any sort of debate. If someone starts derailing and just like talking smack about their opponent, genuinely, if you have seen any sort of political ad, they kind of are borderline ad hominem because they're just kind of trying to deface their opponent. But a bandwagon, moving on, would be just kind of everyone says this is good, therefore it's good. You're not really coming from a place of information. It's just like, well, this person has 400 subscribers, so clearly they're the smartest person in the world when it comes to marketing on social media. It's like, that might not necessarily be true. You haven't provided any background. Did they like have a platform already? Things like that. Slippery slope is my Monday group. I gave this example, but for Wednesday, Friday, if you've ever seen Mean Girls, when that professor or that coach is giving that sex ed lesson where he's like, if you have sex, you will get pregnant and you'll die. It's like, okay, wow, we really went from one thing to the other. Like, not necessarily. There are a lot of things that go into it. It's just kind of going from the worst to, or going from one place to another, just like immediately with no cause. Like the chocolate one, for example, would be like, chocolate has a ton of health benefits, therefore we need to eat it all the time. It should be the only food we consume. Where it's like, are you sure? What about isms could also, or I guess better inflected, what about isms would be kind of like deflection, essentially, where if someone, imagine an interview or imagine when you're trying to do like a talk back with an audience and they bring up, have you considered the fact that you didn't bring up this topic? And instead of addressing what that person said, what about so-and-so? They haven't done this. They never talked about this. And you're deflecting to what about this instead? And that's unhealthy because it shows that you can't just like provide the information that you should be providing. And instead you feel the need to like deflect to something else. A false dilemma is when you just kind of like make something up to kind of set your topic in a situation that doesn't necessarily exist. Like, so many people recently have just been dying because of a lack of vitamin D. And if they did this, it would be better. And it's like, where did your evidence come from? Are they really? Or are they just kind of getting sick? Or are they getting like ill from a vitamin C deficiency or vitamin D deficiency? So that's that. Hasty generalizations are kind of a little akin to what I was saying with slippery slope, of just kind of saying extremist things for the purpose of like shock value. Hasty generalizations would be like, well, this is true, so that means this is true. And that doesn't have to be the case. Red herring is saying something just to kind of like throw people off the scent, kind of like the deflection. A straw man argument is taking what someone said and just completely butchering it to make yourself look good. So like, I think the example in the book is something along the lines of, person A, I believe abortion should be safe and legal. And then straw man argument would be like, so you're saying that we need to fund every single abortion clinic and kill all the babies, and you're saying that you hate children and you never wish you got married to your husband. Where it's like, that person literally said none of that, but you are then saying that, presenting this information based off of that one little sound bite to make them seem bad, make yourself seem worse. It is just kind of blowing things out of proportion. It's essentially like gaslighting. A lot of these are gaslighting. But if you want to see more about them and like probably better and more specific examples, I believe this is chapter 5, nearing the end. And speaking of nearing the end, we got conclusions. A conclusion is the intentional ending of a speech that prepares the audience to think about the speech one last time before it is complete. So one of the first things in your conclusion is a final signpost. And what is a final signpost? It is a rhetorical tool that lets the audience know where we are in the course of a speech. It is, for example, as we conclude the speech, or in the example they said, as we've seen today, it is something that's kind of showing, hey, my conclusion's coming up. It'll make the ears of your audience perk up of like, oh, okay, in case they were kind of like tuning out, they'll know, okay, I can tune back in and I can hear their main points. We'll have more on that later. But it's just kind of like a verbal cue for, hey, the speech is ending. And it's a lot better than you just kind of going, so yeah, that's what I had. Today we talked about this, and I hope you learned this. Like, that is not effective because you just kind of like rambled your way through it. But a signpost is, okay, the speech is ending. And then what is a summary? The second part of this. A summary is a short reminder of your thesis and main point. So imagine, as we conclude, dark chocolate has a rich history, has more recently been found to provide many health benefits, and has a promising future driven by the research and health findings. It's very clear, it's very to the point. You don't want to just bog down your audience with so much information here at the end. They already have enough to digest. You never want to introduce anything new during the conclusion, because this should be about the time where they're like, okay, I think I got this now. And for you to just throw something else in and then not elaborate on it more because you're at the conclusion and it should be short, just something to consider. But yeah, summarizing your main points is very important. You do not want to end with, so yeah, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware that is what happened a lot during the quick start speech, which is totally fine because that kind of is our natural way of concluding. But during stretched out speeches that are organized, you want to show that you are organized, that you are prepared. And lastly, a strong finish. What is a strong finish? Your last finishing line. In some speeches, you will have a call to action or a strong finish that lays out what a speaker wants the audience to do at an end of a speech. You will not have that during like the informative speech where you're not trying to persuade anyone to do anything. I don't believe you will have it in the public deliberation, but policy, 100% you would have that. But for the example, closing line, I encourage you to try a piece of dark chocolate and see what difference it can make in your life. For a call to action in particular, if you were talking about a sort of charity, it would be, so now that you've learned about it, I hope that you might consider going out and donating, finding out more about this cause because it is so important, blah, blah, blah. It would be more eloquent than that, but you get the general gist. It is you asking the audience to do something, or just if you're not trying to do a call to action, just a strong finish. So I hope you have learned more about this today. So now you can see that blah, 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 like whatever you want it to be. Just absolutely not. So yeah, that's it. Like that is not strong. And then that is the end of this presentation. I hope that it was beneficial to you guys. This is something that is applicable to all of your speeches. I'm sure in the upcoming weeks, it's week 4, September 15th right now. In the upcoming weeks, there will be probably a speech or a quiz that deals with some of this information. This is information that will be important to your final. We didn't quite have time to talk about it during class just because it's a very quick-paced course. But these are things that are very important for you to consider moving on as you're starting to outline your other speeches. You might be listening to this and the research and citation PowerPoint might already be posted. If not, and you're very fast and you're listening to this on like September 16th or whatever, it is coming soon. But thank you so much for being attentive. If you listen to all of this, I'm so proud of you and so thankful for you. But thank you so much. Have a nice rest of your afternoon, morning, evening, whatever. Have a nice life.